Welcome, everyone, to this Professional Development Hour presentation brought to you proudly by the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that any opinions presented tonight are solely the opinions of the presenter and not that of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or any other of its affiliates. We certainly hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation, so sit back and relax. And on with the show.
Not going. No forward. Ready? Arrows.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started with our presentation. The name of our speaker. The name of our presentation today is Big Hole in the Ground. Are they valuable? Widespread adaptive reuse of aggregate pits and quarries. The name of our speaker is Mr. Stephen Stokowski. Correct.
Got it.
Yes. He is a graduate. He is a geologist. A graduate of George Washington University, BS, and a master's from South Dakota School of Science and Technology. So please join me in giving Stephen a warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and happy to see all these smiling faces. And since you all have a full belly, I'm going to try to make this talk real interesting. And maybe you'll be irritated now, keep you awake, or maybe you'll just like what I got to say. But one or the other. Roger decided that the first part of this talk, the title was going to be that, because I guess it's a good hook for bringing people in. And we've got a good crowd, so that's great. Now, people use abandoned mines all the time, and that's a political term, and it really is something that I dislike. So I'd hope that if nothing else, when you leave here, you don't use the term abandoned anymore. You just use something else, inactive, something like that. But I'm specifically focusing here on aggregate mining. So this is sand and gravel, loose natural materials. Those operations are often started by a contractor because there's limited capital investment in the beginning, or crushed stone. And the crushed stone has a higher capital investment because you have to put crushers in there, large crushers, and you have to have larger haul trucks, and you have to do blasting and stuff like that. But the ultimate cost of the produced product is actually cheaper with crushed stone, and the performance is often better. But the first examples where people were mining aggregate and then reusing the resultant pits or constructed landforms was in Massachusetts, and this is before the Civil War. So when people say that you don't have any use for these pieces of land after they've been mined, they just don't have any real idea on the history of mining in the United States. But not only in the Civil War they used sand and gravel pits, but here later they were using crushed stone quarries, and more currently there's a lot of residential development within these quarries or hotels. But you can read at the bottom, there's just anything that you can imagine can be utilized as the development course for an operation. You can have the simple thing, golf courses. You can have housing development. You can have really elaborate hotels. You can have energy farms. You can have cooling systems. I was kind of disappointed that the Atlanta quarry was used for water storage and not as a cooling system there because of the hot temperatures around here. But maybe they'll add something like that at that operation. Now Boston, of course, is far away, but people don't necessarily realize that Boston was really a big harbor, a huge harbor with small islands in it and a lot of marshland. And that was then repaired, if you will. The landform, the natural harbor, was then fixed by dumping sand and gravel in it along post-development energy farms, and that were defunct because it silted up. They silted up on Back Bay area. The first thing, though, that happened was that tri-mount. There were 3 large mounds. These are what geologists call cames in Boston itself. And they had navigation lights on these, but they decided they didn't need navigation lights anymore, and this was all excavated. This is a diagram of a sketch, really, of what they look like. And these were completely mined out and then used to backfill around that area. And then they built the State House there. During the excavation, they were building the State House. Here's the State House today. So all this, and this is actually probably a real accurate depiction of how high they were. They were all mined out, used for fill, and they built municipal buildings there. Later, in the 1860s, this started just before the Civil War, there were real problems in what is called Back Bay, a real exclusive area now, but it was a terrible area at the time because there was a lot of disease and dysentery, and not wetlands, but floodlands that were trapping pollutants, because everybody just dumped right into the central harbor. So to fix that, sand and gravel was mined from about this location over here in Massachusetts, and that's about 6 miles away, and then dumped into Back Bay. This was a cushy thing for all these people who were potentially going to fight the Civil War, because they were exempt from going into the Army or the Navy. They went into the railroad operation. They did a lot of mining, a lot of tipping, 26 trips a day, relatively small cars. It took them 15 years, and they increased the size of the city over twice. And they mined in a lot of areas, and it's some of these areas, people are living there now in houses, and they have no idea that their land is mined out land that was used to fill in Back Bay during the Civil War. This is Back Bay now. A lot of the filled area is over here, but some of this is also filled area and requires a lot of tremendous engineering to build taller structures on this land, because underneath of it is a couple of things that are really unstable. There's one thing that's the Boston blue clay, which is a weathered shale, and then there's all this fill which is not compacted to any value, shipwrecks, all sorts of stuff underneath it. They just dumped it on there, and then they have pilings in that to support a lot of these houses. Well, the original wood pilings have the top 1.5 feet deteriorated because in the issues of maintaining the waterfront, they repaired the seawall, so the seawall is now impermeable, so the water level dropped down and the top of all the pilings rotted. So that's been an expensive proposition, usually borne by the individual owners to fix that. But one thing leads to another. These are some of the sand and gravel pits illustrations. Here's some maps from the time, and this area is, see, here's this Y, that's about this Y, although it was extended more. And you can see residential housing in this area, the Charles River over here, and that's in the town of Needham. More mining in Needham, and this was done pre-truck, so they would lay rail lines past each of these sand and gravel deposits and then excavate them using steam shovels. But here's another one that if you're interested in electronics and you're in the Massachusetts area, everybody goes to You Do It Electronics. That's where you get all your stuff at You Do It Electronics. And You Do It Electronics is right there. That's an area that was mined out. Right there. Here's the Charles right here. Here's this bend. So subsequent redevelopment of these nice, flat, well-drained properties, which were previously hilly and couldn't be used for anything. Dedham, another area. This has got warehouses and stuff like that there now, but a lot of these warehouses are in areas that were residential, but the housing was then less valuable, particularly after it was run down, and then the current usage. So they've gone through 2 generations already of development. Massachusetts has lots of quarries in it, more so than you have in the Atlanta area. And a lot of these quarries are old, and these ones that I have outlined in red are ones that I'm going to show some illustrations on the redevelopment of those sites. But pretty much every one of these sites is redeveloped in some way. People have heard of the Roxbury pudding stone, and so I like to put that in there. This is a distinctive rock type, and it's used in gavels. It's used in the State House for columns, and State House in Massachusetts, etc. This is a monument made from Roxbury pudding stone in Gettysburg. And the Roxbury pudding stone was first mined for dimension stone and then later for crushed stone. It was less useful as crushed stone, so the operations then did not fully develop. But this is an area where this whole area is a hill, and there was mining along the edges for crushed stone. Up here, there's a grocery store Stop and Shop, which is similar to Kroger's down here. Up here is a big hospital, New England Baptist, and a lot of people go across the world to go to New England Baptist to get their joints replaced because they're pretty advanced and they have robotic technology and they've had it for 20 years to replace it, so that gives better alignment when you have that kind of an operation. The Roxbury conglomerate is something that you can see off of 95, or you could go to the Stop and Shop area if you're up there, because there's actually a little park there that has some great exposures. But the deposit is similar to what you have in the far west, not like you have on the East Coast, because the deposit formed back in the time when there were a lot of really large mountain chains on the East Coast, and there were big alluvial flans which formed. But the Roxbury pudding stone is something that as you go on the ground to areas that are upslope originally, these are big blocks, big boulders, and then as you go further to the coast, what was the original coast, it goes to almost sand size. But the sweet spot is pretty much in the middle, and that's where this whole hill exposure was. Excuse me?
Why is it called pudding stone?
Why is it what?
Why is it called pudding stone?
Oh, because it looks like pudding, and this was something that was mined back in the day when people would use very descriptive terms like that you would have in your home for food items to describe the rock. So it's a metamorphosed gravel. Yeah. Here's the stop. Here's some close-up photographs and on-site photographs. See, this was just mined in this area, and then they left this, and this is a park now, but there's a development here, so if you want to get your energy drink before you hike around the park, you can get it in Stop and Shop, or I think there's also there's a TGI Fridays at the time and a Starbucks there. But and this is a view into it. The Roe Quarry. Roe Quarry is very important stone source, or was a very important stone source in Boston. And if you go to Boston, look for a purple aggregate in the concrete, and that came from the Roe Quarry. Unfortunately, this rock is reactive with alkalis and Portland cement concrete, and it's causing all these buildings to deteriorate. But the Roe Quarry is right there on the map. This is what it looks like in a historic photograph, and you have a good high wall behind it, and here's the quarry pre-redevelopment into condos and apartments. Here's the quarry back in the day. This old style construction is really similar to the quarry in Atlanta that was redeveloped into a pond for water supply. Now, this quarry did not have a pit, though. It was a hillside quarry, and hillside quarries are generally easier to redevelop, and they're free draining. Pits are not so easy to redevelop because you have to either pump or utilize the water feature in your redevelopment. Here's the Roe Quarry, and the color of this is not anywhere near the color on the computer screen, but it's a light purple. And I.M. Pye and other famous architects really like this. Pye was the guy who selected it, and then there were about 5 or 6 copycat architects who selected what he selected then to use in concrete. And it's also used around the area as decorative stone. One of the first developments is this one here called Overlook Ridge Project. And there's the Quarry Stone Project. And they both have an appreciation for the rock face behind them. The latest one is the Chase Project. And you may note they basically all use some stone from there in their entrance, if not along walls in the development.
Is there any more work on the quarry now? Or is it all
No, it's just when the developers are doing small artisanal extractions, if you will. Massachusetts Broken Stone is out here. This is 128. Currently, if you come up and go up to Maine, you would probably go through the city with the big dig. But you can also take 128 around, which is an inner beltway, or 495, an outer beltway, or the third beltway, 146, which is out here, which isn't on this map. So there's multiple ways to go north, away from Rhode Island, if you will. You see the stone coming from mass broken stone. They made a lot of these as something that would market their stone, and they're curbs. And when you start looking up there, you see these all over the place, and they're very durable. They're on the Mass Pike, they're along the side of the road. Towns used them to delineate their cemeteries, things of this nature. But that's the easiest way to recognize this stone up there. So you can bore your grandkids or your children or your wife to tears by talking about this. It's from mass broken stone.
So how big are those chunks?
2 inches. 2.5 inches across. These things are this big, which is really about the edge of what a normal person could possibly lift. And usually it would take 2 people. You have to be pretty strong to lift one of those. It's actually in 2 towns, Weston and Waltham. And the quarry was run by the Robinsons. The Robinsons were very, very professionally active on a national level. And this quarry had been there a long time. See, this is an old operation, but it was a crushed stone operation. They had 2 pits. Town line goes right between them. And this was flooded in the 1980s. But this is right, very close to Brandeis. Brandeis is about over there in the scale. So, but the kids from Brandeis almost never go over here, and so they have a good relationship, if you will. And as far as I know, nobody's ever drowned or anything in this. I mean, as far as a student from Brandeis. This is now the operation for cooling for Biogen. Biogen produces synthetic biologic materials, and they have this operation here, and they pump water down to the bottom, and here's the diagram of the whole thing, and extract water from the bottom and discharge it on the top, but it's cooling water, and they have a heat exchanger up in their plant, which then cools their plant, their process, and also their administrative offices there. I think there's one other place in the United States which has used this kind of technology, but it probably could be used more, particularly in very, very deep operations. Now we're down to the Bellwood Quarry. Here's a picture of the Bellwood Quarry before it was flooded and when it was operated by Vulcan, one of the Vulcan Materials, one of the last operators there. Here's a haul truck, here's a drill rig down here, and there's a lot of broken rock down here. They did a pretty good job of keeping the faces clean, so there's not a lot of risk of collapse in that particular quarry. But after lots of investment for infrastructure more than anything else, you know, it's now turned into Westside Park, and the whole area was revegetated, reshaped outside for more condition for a park as opposed to an aggregate operation. So all the original machinery is gone, and they did a TBM tunnel to connect to actually another small spot, and then they pump water into this for emergency use for the city of Atlanta. Now, at the time of construction, they felt they would have 30 to 90 days of water reserves. as Atlanta gets bigger and bigger, of course, this is going to go down further and further. Here's where the TBM, let's give you an idea of the scale of this. Here's where the TBM came out. And well, that's actually, yeah, that was one TBM, a smaller one, and here's another one down here, although some of this was conventional mining here. Here's rail, hauling material out, and then dumping it in here where it was hauled out of the pit. Here's just at the near the time when it was starting to be flooded. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about is an international development, very, very high end. But there's an Intercontinental Hotel in Atlanta too, but this one is in Shanghai, and it's not a coastal quarry. It's actually a little bit inland, but it's flooded. They have large rainfall amounts there, and they have an inland lake here. And of course, Shanghai is a big port. And there's lots of money in Shanghai. Here's this hotel, which is built into this quarry, and there's other development around it. Here's the hotel. It goes under the water. You can rent rooms for $1,500 a night under the water and look at fish. The fish aren't in the quarry. They're in an aquarium next to your window. But you think there is. Or you could rent kayaks and stuff like that. Or you can do some sort of crazy hike around the perimeter of the quarry. Unlike some of the other operations I mentioned, this rock is incredibly unstable. And they had big problems with it because it's really poor rock. And the problems were so large that even though this is a big hotel, it doesn't touch the quarry walls in any place, any spot, because the rock was too unstable for them to actually put an anchorage. So everything is vertically loaded into the bottom of the quarry in piling.
Hotel for flooding. Does this thing have an outlet that doesn't let it go any higher than that water level?
I don't know that. I tried to find that out, but I would presume they have pumps. Here's a view below the water. You can have a meal down there in the restaurant or sleep. Sushi.
Sushi.
Yeah. And there was another one. There's one that's being proposed, if you will, in Mexico, and it's Sactun. Now, I was with Vulcan years ago, and we were looking for stone sources internationally to bring into the Gulf Coast. And we called it the Crescent Project, because this crescent here, if you will, into the United States. But material eventually was identified here, and a big port facility was built in conjunction with Cemex, which is the Mexican plant, with Vulcan and Cemex being 50-50 owners there. And they built ocean-going vessels. And they hauled material, a lot of material into Houston, into New Orleans, over here into Mobile. And I know that some stuff actually started going up the coast, but it competes with ocean-going material coming down from Nova Scotia and from Newfoundland. So it doesn't go too far up the coast. And not only that, this material is marine limestone. It's relatively soft, and it's not good for skid resistance in pavements. but the material coming down from the Canadian provinces is good for skid resistance, so it has the advantage of being used in highways along the East Coast. Several years ago, Vulcan renamed this Saktun, probably really more for political pressure than anything else. But here's the timeline and the players that are something that you might be interested in. Now, this was a complete greenfield project. There was almost nothing there except jungle. But a big quarry was developed there, which was loading ocean-going vessels, and they were shipping out tens of millions of tons a year of material. And then more recently, the president of Mexico has decided that he wants to have ecotourism and a big rail line, which he doesn't have to have permitted because he's the president. So he has just proposed this whole rail line, and they've started to build it. But he's playing really hardcore politics there, and you can see down here that some of the hardcore politics that they have, and the export permit was revoked. It's now been since reinstated, but it's a big fight with a company that's right in your own backyard. Really, they're headquartered in Birmingham, but there are operations in Norcross, for example, very close to here. Here's the port down here. Here's the quarry inside here with cleared land around here. This is all pretty much dense jungle down here. This is a road, and this image here leaves a little bit to be desired, but you can see this outline here is this part here. There's a lake back over here, which was not flooded when this image was taken, but it's all flooded now. And they have a proposal for a resort there, mixed use, and also a military base for either the Mexicans or the Russians, I guess. Here's the ocean-going vessel that I think Vulcan itself owns, and here's some of the storage facilities there. And that image is basically looking right here, this way. To develop this was an extremely big project. It took 30 years in Vulcan to get this going. I mean, they looked all over the place, and it was hard to find rock that had adequate quality for the U.S. market in Mexico or in Dominican Republic or Venezuela, or you name it. There's just not much good stuff in the Caribbean. Here's some citations. You can contact me. Thank you. I'm sure we might have some questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. Any questions?
Two questions, really. One, the biogen facility that you mentioned in your slideshow, they were drawing from a 350-foot depth for cooling. I was going to ask about geothermal. Are there any opportunities if you're backfilling one of these properties to bury geothermal systems in while you're doing the backfilling and then take advantage of that depth to get cooling for residential even?
Probably not, because you'd want to have permeable material in the backfill. So technically maybe, but not, for example, there was some big operations in what's called the Quincy Granite, and that's now a state park over there, and they had a very deep pool there, And not at that particular location, but at other Quincy granite locations, there were aggregate quarries. At that particular location, there was dimension stone. So you had actually a 450-foot deep pit there. But for probably 50 years at least, there was the issue that, oh, there were bodies disposed of in there, or the people from South Boston would dump cars there. And there was a huge amount of, my understanding is that there was a huge amount of broken material, not rock, but rail cars and regular cars and construction debris and bodies at depth there. And a couple divers who went down there to look for people got tangled up in this stuff and died themselves. So the thing is that a lot of these old operations, now the thing with that particular Quincy operation was that it was owned by the state early on, and the state had no control, took no control and no responsibility for the property. So all this stuff went on there. But with Massachusetts Broken Stone, these guys had total control over their property. They were an operator, and it was a very, very clean area. They didn't just go and dump cars in there and didn't allow people to come in, and they operated there for years. And so, and they were kind of a leader in the higher end development of a property, which is what that is.
Question 2 was on gravity storage, gravity batteries. A lot of people were talking about these elevators that'll lift weights up and store kinetic energy as potential energy for electricity storage, power storage for these wind farms and solar. If you've got a quarry that's at elevation and you could pump up to that and then drain back down, do you know of any that are being utilized for that purpose?
No. Massachusetts has a pump storage facility, and I've seen some other ones, but they were not aggregate operations beforehand. They were standalone development for pools for basically a dam flooded at the top, higher elevation.
Before that, Roger, second. Before you answered this question, you were talking about 2 quarries. They were both in Massachusetts. You were saying one of them was well maintained. What was the difference between that one and the other one that was?
The other one was filled in by material from the Big Dig. The final straw there was that there was a lady, a teenager, I think, who was killed, and like previous rumors, her body was disposed of in the quarry. Her body was probably disposed of somewhere else. Nonetheless, they pumped it out, and they were looking for another place to take some of the material from the Big Dig, which was non-stable material, and they dumped it there. But this operation was so old that the rail service to it was in before 1800, and it was granite blocks for the rails, and then after that operation became defunct, it was taken over by the state. So that was possibly abandoned, although I think they took it for tax purposes than anything else. But nearby there was other Quincy granite operations, which were hillside type quarries, so they're free draining, and they were aggregate quarries. And there's a bank and a couple banks and another grocery store and some apartment buildings in those. And so they're you don't even know that they're there. You drive up 95, you have to kind of know they're over to the right because you're paying attention to not getting in an accident. And you drive past this stuff, but it's miles long. You know? And I think it's kind of cool in that regard. So the difference is that the one was very, very old, and it was something that was owned by the state, and the state really doesn't have much, doesn't spend much money on control until it becomes a park. And there were no parks in the early 1800s anywhere.
What would you say would be the top few engineering concerns on making this kind of reclaiming?
Having a rock face that isn't composed of material that would break off and collapse into there. And the way that's maintained is to have adequate geotechnical engineering during the development of the quarry. That's pretty much the first one, you know. And the second one would be, well, you know, pit-type quarries, not so much sand and gravel pits, but pit-type quarries, particularly in the Piedmont and the Appalachians and all that, are going to flood. So you need to utilize the water portion of it for development. In sand and gravel operations that are out further in the coastal plain, you know, there are water features that occur out there, and when those have been utilized for more profit than not, it's been for golf courses. The other thing though is that if they've got some rock in them, they're often then utilized for golf courses and residential developments, and that's done throughout the Midwest, and pretty successfully there too. So unstable rock and water are the two things.
Okay, I have one. You were talking about doing the pumping the cold water up to do cooling and have that thermal exchange. So I get the water at the bottom naturally is going to be colder, but if you do that enough times, you've got to have another piece of the heat exchange equation where that now warmer water that you pumped up, that then, I guess, you know, you're pulling in something from the bottom. I don't know if it's just a convection coming from the top somehow swirling around or what, but what's that other piece of the equation that then continues to cool
in
the water
Massachusetts, the average groundwater temperature is 45 degrees.
Okay. So is there more water coming in?
Here it's much warmer. I mean, I think it's 58 or something like that in this area.
So it's a constant flow of new fresh water in. Is that what's happening? Okay.
Yeah. But they don't discharge it. I mean, they discharge it back into the pit. And it snows in the winter, and they just had 13 inches of snow right there. So.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got something here for you.
Excuse me.
Some of our appreciation. Really appreciate you coming over here.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation given at one of the Atlanta Metro Chapter meetings of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. To find out more about us or to join us, check us out at gspe.org.